Okay, hello everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you for attending this next installment of the Society of American Archivists Records Management Roundtable virtual Hangout series. So we're glad you could all join us today or watch this later. Okay. Are you hearing that?
Hearing what?
Oh, you're not hearing any feedback?
No.
Okay, then I will keep going. So my name is Beth Cron, and I'm chair of the Records Management Roundtable, and I'm joined today by Brad Houston, and he's the immediate past chair of the Roundtable.
Hello.
So we're excited for our presentation today. We're joined by Joanne Kazmarek, the Director of the Records and Information Management Services at the University of Illinois, and Brent West. He is the Assistant Director of Records and Information Management Services. So thank you very much for joining us today. Joanne and Brent will be providing an overview and an update on their work in processing email using predictive coding. They previously presented on this topic at the Best Practices Exchange conference in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania last October. As you all know, email provides a rich history of an organization, but it also can pose unique challenges for archivists. So it can be difficult to acquire and process due to sensitive content, diverse topics and formats, which can inhibit access and research. So at the University of Illinois, they are using predictive coding that is used by the legal community to identify and prioritize sensitive content for view and redaction when generating descriptive metadata of themes and trends. So this will empower records creators, archivists, and researchers to better understand email collections and to preserve and protect them as well. So if those watching have any questions, you have a few ways you can ask today. You can ask on Twitter using the SAA RMRT hashtag. You can also ask on YouTube if you are logged into the site. And you can also leave a comment on the schedule blog, which you probably linked from to get here today. And then if all of those methods don't work, you can send me an email at bethany.cron, C-R-O-N, @nara.gov. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you once again to Joanne and Brent for being here today. And we'll start off with asking you to provide an overview of your project.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. Brent and I both really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm excited to see what you both have been doing with the Records Management Roundtable and these Hangout sessions. So in terms of an overview of the project, I wanted to just a little bit of background on where we've come from on this. I also have a position in the University Archives here at the University of Illinois, and the RIMS, Records and Information Management Services unit department of the university has only been around for 4 years now, but it was formed intentionally to try to address the inconsistency over how we're managing records across our campuses, both in terms of periods of retention and just general guidance and things like that. And so we were fortunate to get support for that. One of the first tasks was to take a look at that relationship between archives and records management and see what we could do to clarify what the university administrative units should be doing when it comes to providing the historical records to the archives. And one of the big concerns had to do with the communications of the senior administrators, and so which are all in email these days. So we tried to clarify the expectation of giving the email messages to the archives, but there was no mechanism in place, and there was a lot of confusion over what that really meant. We were getting attention by senior administrators to their email in a way that they had never, and they were concerned. What does it mean when you give your email to the archives? Is it going to be on the web suddenly or whatever? And so we launched into what we call this email preservation project, And the first part of that was kind of this listening tour to really understand the concerns of the senior administrators. And I think the same kind of concerns that everybody would have, issues around sensitive content, what about material that really should be redacted, what about material that maybe wouldn't be redacted but is still sensitive, how do we know who's going to access this when, is it going to be immediately released, is it going to come out later. And in the course of that, Brent started looking into the legal community's tools that are used for e-discovery, because we understand that there's a lot out there that's already in play that hasn't necessarily been available to the archivist to look at ways to go through and sort the emails according to not just looking for sensitive content, but also looking at more richly at the context of the email communications and things like that. So we had Brent explore that. It took us probably about a year to collect information and meet with all the senior administrators on all 3 campuses, and then proposed that part of the move forward was to start to explore some of these tools. And in the course of doing that, we were also beginning to work with the state archives around a preservation repository environment for the future emails or other electronic records from the university. And since we're a state agency, we're considered a state agency, in turn, our permanently valuable records should indeed be considered as part of the state's permanently valuable records. So we started exploring the preservation repository, and at the same time looking at the barrier is still going to be, how do we help people feel comfortable with their email. I can't say that we're there yet, but this is where we also looked to the Capstone approach that NARA has put forth there, pretty much trying to stop whittling down, well, this particular email from this senior administrator isn't really a record because it just asks that particular administrator to go to lunch, and that's not really business of the university. But as you know, from an archives point of view, that could still shed some interesting light on the business, the interactions of the people. And so rather than try to niggle apart the non-record stuff out of senior administrators' email, it's like, let's just whole cloth say we're going to start with all of it, like the Capstone, and I understand that the way that's being applied still allows for some levels of exclusion from that content, but and then in turn from there is the need to then apply these tools to it. Now, we're not really where we would like to be with that yet, but we certainly are moving forward with that, and I think we're going to continue down this path of exploring the predictive coding concepts, but I'm going to let Brent pretty much give the background on that and where we're headed with it, because he's much more in tune with it.
Yeah, so some of the topics that I touched on at the Best Practices Exchange, and those slides are available on the BPE website. So we talked about some of the barriers to access. Why is it that we need to look to predictive coding tools? And I think these are probably familiar issues for all of us, but the fact that there is such mixed content, there's the contracts and policy development, a lot of background context going on in the email at the same time that somebody's sending notes to say that their spouse is sick or in the hospital or something to that effect. So there's sensitive content and very mundane content. Hey, there's donuts in the break room. Mixed in with the good stuff. The organization is not always there. There's issues where some people, actually, we've heard from people who actually use their deleted items folder as their storage folder. So they know that if they hit the delete button, it goes to that folder, and that's where they always know to access their email messages. Other people keep everything in their inbox. Some people do a great job of having 30, 40 folders to organize everything by topic. So there's just a great deal of inconsistency. Searching through all that is a challenge. Often it's using the native, whether it's Outlook or some other email client's search functionality. You're limited by exact match keywords or to from date range kind of fields. And then I think one of the biggest issues I think that Joanne's kind of already touched on is the trust factor, that you have to be willing to trust the people you're giving the email content to, and these senior administrators especially because they're dealing with very high-profile litigation topics and things like that sometimes. Having that trust relationship is, I think, critical to getting anywhere with being able to collect email to begin with. And I'll share my screen here. So this is one of the slides from the Best Practices Exchange presentation. Just talks a little bit about the predictive coding. So there's technology-assisted review is the technology that the courts have already authorized for law firms to use in, especially in like the federal rules of civil procedure. And there's that's a very large umbrella term that can involve a ton of different ways in which you review this content. At a minimum, usually you're going through, you're classifying the messages as responsive or not, and so that could just be literally showing you every single message or document. You mark it as responsive or not, and you can also usually redact within those tools. Continuous active learning is a subset of TAR, and that is where we're really interested. It's using machine learning algorithms to, and in combination with human input to essentially train to say these are the kinds of documents that I'm looking for, and then it goes out, does a search, brings you more documents, and says, based on that, we think you'd be interested in some of these documents. You again tag them, and doing an iterative process. You can usually do somewhere between 500 and 1,000 documents or messages, and that will be enough to train the document the algorithms to go out and return a fairly high recall of the documents you're looking for without a lot of false positives or false negatives. So I've got some screenshots here, and they're probably somewhat small, but we can send out a link later, potentially. This is from Microsoft. They had an Ignite conference about a year ago, I think, where they talked about a product that they recently acquired and has been integrated into Office 365 called Equivio, and they've rebranded it to Advanced eDiscovery. But it's this is a screenshot showing some of the graphs that it produces. This is in particular graphs showing the types of documents versus attachments. The next graph shows once it's done some processing, it's able to tell you how many documents you would have to review in order to have a certain confidence level that you're finding all the documents that you're looking for. So in this case, it's showing that at reviewing 20% of the collection, it thinks that it can bring back about 85% of the documents that you'd be looking for. And then it actually monetizes that, so you can put in human time costs, your hourly rate, and do the math to see that if you wanted to get 100%, you might have to review every single document, and that would be potentially millions of dollars. If you're willing to accept a 98% threshold, you can substantially reduce that cost. So that's kind of the thought that we're looking at is, what's a good enough practice for getting some review on this content, and can this predictive coding find things that are tangentially related? So we can do keyword searches for medical, sick, things like that, but can we just have this tool find everything related to that conceptually, so we don't have to come up with an extensive list of all the keywords that might match HIPAA-related content. And so this page is some of the functionality that Equivio can do in that realm, which is automatic theme generation. So it's taking concepts that it finds related, mentions of words that are relevant to other words, and in some cases you may not even find, a human may not necessarily find that connection right away, but it's seeing documents that have similarities to them and then aggregating them. There are other tools that we've been exploring. So Quivio is one of them. NextLP is another product that is actually licensed out of technology that was developed here at the university. So we've been in contact with the vendors there, and some of they're more of a natural language processing tool with network visualizations, a lot of filtering and sorting capabilities in that tool.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that where we're at with this in terms of so that's the background on the project and why we're thinking this makes some sense. Where we're at with this is trying to get some support going forward with a project that will give us an opportunity to explore the tools a little further. And we're lucky that at the university, some of the folks in the computer science department are leaders in these technologies, and so we do have access, or hopefully will, to this other tool that NextLP has developed. And the idea again is to be able to explore, start with the Capstone approach, which is we're going to take in this case working with the state archives, take the email from the governor's offices, the folks that report up through there, and not worry so much about trying to manually classify all of that content, although we want to experiment with doing some manual classification so that we can see how the tools work with respect to how accurate they will be with what a human would do. This is similar to what Virginia did, for any of you that are familiar with the Kane emails from the Virginia State Archives and Library. So we want to look at that, and then also be able to just have the tools go in blind, so to speak, and try to look at finding the patterns of topical patterns as well as these relationships. And that's what's kind of neat about where the tools are moving, is that they're really starting to combine what was maybe once considered real typical for the tools around looking at concepts and saying these are similar concepts, but then beginning to also look at the communication relationships between the people and overlay that with the concepts over a period of time, so you can kind of see who's talking to whom, when, about what topics, and how frequently, and that can help learn a little bit more about what was going on at the agency, or how organizations might talk across one another. So I mean, we haven't actually applied that yet to any sets of email, but we've been working on trying to get the email.
Yeah, we've had just kind of playing around with some demo copies at this point on some very small test collections, but ideally we'd like to ramp this up to much larger collections, much longer times that we could play around with them. And I think some of the outcomes that we're hoping to see, one is to be able to provide these tools to the administrators themselves so that they can find information for their own use case, active use needs, as well as kind of a pre-processing before they send the material to the archives. They can kind of pre-screen and find all those messages from their friends and families that were personal messages, that sort of thing. And then I think in terms of the finding aid, we can do a lot of descriptive metadata on these collections to say that this is Governor Quinn's email. It contains these topical areas, and who they were talking to, their most frequent or high volume recipients, and that sort of thing.
We're fortunate right now that the governor of the state of Illinois has been pretty supportive of the state archives, and many people don't have a lot of positive things to say right now about the state of Illinois government, our governor or otherwise. But I would say this is one area where the state archives has been, Dave Jones is the director of the archives, and he said that he's surprisingly getting really good support from the governor's office to get the emails to him, and maybe it's because it's the governor's predecessors and he doesn't care about them, but we're happy about that. And I think there's opportunities for being able to just eventually provide much better access to this kind of content over time for the purpose of the state, not just for research, general research purposes, but for response to FOIA requests. I think that we see that the process that is used, the FOIA process that's used at the university, and I would assume at other state agencies right now, it varies a little bit. And we think that down the road, these tools could really make that process better and make it a lot easier to make sure that the requesters are getting the full scope of content without accidentally releasing sensitive content or material that's not ready to be released. So we think there's opportunities, again, that kind of gets into the practical side of active records management versus the archival side. But I would say that the the struggle around getting cooperation with people, it kind of goes back to the trust piece that Brent also underscored, is getting the cooperation of people to, when you're not in the private sector where you might have some policies that mandate people to hand over their email. In higher education, that's pretty hard to do. And so being able to get senior administrators to agree, we got support from one high-level administrator who was dutifully going through her emails and flagging them from her point of view of what she thought should come to an archives. And of course, it was too much work for her, but she did it over the course of several months. And in the end, I think we received 6 emails from her. Out of all her emails, she found 6 that she thought were okay for the archives to have. And it made me sad to think that all of her work for those months only produced that much long-term value. But that's where we're still. That's why I think the Capstone approach is worth looking at for organizations and agencies that want to be able to capture the historic record of the institution from the communications point of view. But you're going to need to have some tools that do a fairly robust job of parsing that content to make sure that you're not releasing things inappropriately. And that's why we think that the FOIA processes are the ones that we want to look at, because those are applied to current information and current requests for information. So whatever that process is, if we can improve that process, it'll be better to get more people information quickly. And also, we think that's it'll work for the long term as well, because that whole review process right now is fairly labor intensive. So in terms of our next steps, I think we're still actively trying to gather small sets of email from individuals at the university to work on as we can with some of these tools. And Brent has been, we're also looking at the rolling out of 365 for the university because it has Equivio built into it. Brent's been looking at that with his own Gmail account so far. And the hope is that we'll be able to test that more fully down the road here. Okay, we're getting a question from Twitter. What format of email collection are you working with?
So far, everything's been, we're in an exchange environment both here at the university and at the state level, so everything is either directly on the Exchange server, loaded up to an Exchange account, or more often it's a PST file that we're working with. Usually somebody who has donated it voluntarily, or it's their predecessor's email account. The states, I think everything from the state has been in PST format. They use file vault, some vault system that was capturing all the email from the state accounts, but they exported those to PST format as well.
And in terms of the tools, I think part of that question had something to do with processing to be able to be used by the tools. I know there's within this one tool that's being developed through the computer science department now, and as part of this vended product, XLP creates. I think that I'm not sure, we're not privy to the process, but they do have a way to bring the PST files and convert them and put them into the SQL database structure. And I'm not sure exactly what that process is. And then, do you know what the Equivio is? That's just working directly off the.
That's Equivio pulls in either PST or off the Exchange server. Because it's a Microsoft supported product, it's able to do the same sort of text extraction from email that the native indexing that Exchange server uses. There are some open source text extraction tools out there that work to varying degrees. The text from the email itself is, I think, relatively simple. The text from the attachments, I think, is a little bit more complex. And of course, anything that's not embedded doesn't have the text already in it. So scans of documents that haven't been OCR'd. I don't think any of the tools will go out and conduct those OCR efforts. So that's another area where as we get further along in this, I'd like to explore ways that we can identify, especially like PDF documents that do not have extracted text associated with them, or very little compared to the file size. I think that's a ripe area for looking at manual review initially of those documents, or to send them through some sort of OCR engine, and then come back and reprocess them.
Yeah, I do know that some of the tools also, I mean, that we're looking at they're not exclusively being designed just for analysis of email. And we want to be able to look at tools that are going to take in other electronic documents as well, and then be able to incorporate that into a bigger set of materials for review by specifically focusing on this from the archives point of view. But I would suppose this would also benefit the administrators if we have the electronic, essentially the general files of the administrators all in one place as well.
One of a couple of other features that a lot of these tools have, so they have email threading. So they'll go through, if you only have the last message in a chain, it will go through and generally seems to do a pretty good job at parsing that and pulling out the metadata that's embedded within the message to have the whole chain, and you can, especially in terms of describing relationships and how the frequency of communication between a couple of people, you can see how an email maybe was, went along this path and there's back and forth replies, and then maybe it got branched out and there's two different unique threads going on. A lot of these tools are able to kind of visualize that and show you that this message between these two people happened on this date, and then the reply happened on a separate date, going the other direction. So there's threading, there's deduplication, which is a big one for a lot of messages where there's 10, 20 people on the thread, or a mass mail even. It's able to kind of just throw out all of them, so you're not having to review that same message over and over and over. And it deduplicates in a way that, because every recipient copy of a message is different, the headers on the email will show you different servers that it passed through and spam filters that maybe processed it. So there's what they call near deduplication. They look at the body of the content, try to 80 to 90% of it is similar, and you can set that threshold and make your call based on that.
The follow-up question about considering the PST as a final preservation format, that's a really good question. I'm curious what you think should be the final preservation format. We certainly have the capability of saving the PSTs. We're working with Preservica right now as well for part of this with the state archives, with the expectation that Preservica is going to be the preservation repository, and we can store those PSTs there. But
and that when you upload them to Preservica, it uses, I think it's email committee, to convert that to EML format.
And so that's the route that we're going right now. But I'm kind of curious about what other people think in terms of PST. And if there's, I know that the work that's been done around breaking everything out into XML, but I'd just be curious about participants here if you have other thoughts on that. I mean, we haven't been focusing really on the obviously we need to pay attention to the preservation format of this, but this particular project is really more focusing on trying to get at the content of the emails rather than final decisions on the preservation environment for it, although we are using Preservica right now.
Well, I'll say from my experience here at UWM, so there's been sort of a disconnect between what we've been receiving and what we can do things with. Like, we've also been receiving PST, but just from a purely archival perspective, I'm not really comfortable with using it as the final format just because it is a proprietary format, and there are tools available to extract them, but you know they're almost all themselves proprietary, and so there's the question of how much do we invest in this, how much, you know, particularly with Wisconsin's budget issues, how much are we going to get to invest in this? You know, if we are moving them out of PST, what do we move them to? Is, you know, MBox is sort of the open source standard, but it's I think a little less readable than PST, and so yeah, I don't know. I too would be interested in hearing what people watching this would say about this.
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing matter of discussion that we'll probably need to you know, keep our eyes on. I know that I'm not really up on the work that's been happening in North Carolina with Kelly Eubank, but I know that they've done a fair bit of work in this area a while back. So that would be one place I'd be looking to see what their suggestions are. I think the other piece of it is that matter of the de facto standards, and if the maybe it's a big if, you know, so maybe in terms of forever and ever retention, maybe PSTs really just aren't going to cut it. But I would also ask if there's a way to continue to read them going forward for some indefinite period of time. Is that sort of is it good enough for the time being, with the understanding that we need to look at that as it becomes at risk? And so that good enough preservation approach, I don't know. I think in some ways you could also look at it as, once you have the content in some tools where you're able to do some analysis of it, could you take a derivative of all that and say, here's what we learned? So it's almost like extracting a summary of the exchanges between the people without necessarily saving every last shred of explicit emails. You know, we think about it in the context of even transaction records that become reports, summary budget reports and annual reports and things like that. Is it okay out of an enterprise system to say we're going to save the reports forever and ever, even though right now we have the transaction data, but we don't necessarily want to keep every bit of that transaction data forever? Although arguments can be made that you don't know what the future researchers might want, and they might think of different kinds of queries to run against the data. So we're getting into that big data question. When is it okay to let some of the raw data go? And I know for us here at the university, we've recently launched a research data service office that's asking these questions because they're trying to support the big sets of research data that are created by the faculty on the campus, with the caveat that it's not going to be forever. They're making a 5-year commitment, and then looking at the use of that data over time and the ability to reuse it, repurpose it. And the folks that manage our enterprise environment, the banner system here, are also wondering, do we, you know, there's that push and pull of keeping all the data forever just because we have it, versus what's the cost and the benefit down the road. So I think email kind of fits into that category as well.
So we got another comment on YouTube, and that is, what is your process for determining the quote-unquote good enough thresholds for review and release? How is this impacted by public disclosure FOIA requirements?
Again, we don't have, within this project, we don't have that process nailed down just yet, but we're hoping to, because we're going to be working with the state archives and and the governor email around this. Within what I can tell you is that within the university, the release of information through the FOIA office it goes through a fairly thorough review that is in close consultation with the University Council's office. They go through the exceptions. There's specific exceptions spelled out in the Illinois Freedom of Information Act for the types of content that can be withheld from a request, and they follow that, but they also are increasingly trying to be as transparent as they can be. We've had many conversations with them about their process, and they say they're increasingly releasing some content that may be considered personal and perhaps not even overly relevant to the request, but just for the sake of if it's not overly sensitive, and there's this it's not a very concrete exception around this notion of if a reasonable person would consider it reasonably highly sensitive. I don't know the exact language of it, but something like that. Then they may not release it. But if it's just, hey, honey, pick up a loaf of bread, they're probably more inclined these days to release it, even though it's clearly personal. So anyway, so that process is very much a back and forth with their University Council's office, and sometimes going back to the requester to make sure they've got the right content, and they apply redactions through. They're doing it with PDF redaction tools, I think, and then they when they're all done with that, they're submitting it to the individual. But that in terms of the open, open access to information, I would say that we're at least. I don't really know what the process is specifically in the governor's office. Each state agency has their own process for responding to the request for information, but increasingly, I think they're at the university. I mean, that we're getting more and more requests all the time, and their process is still fairly manual, but it's driven by those exceptions in the law, and then the interpretation of counsel's office on that level of sensitivity.
Yeah, so I think the FOIA request would still be kind of adjudicated by the FOIA folks, whoever that is in whatever state agency. So any content that's within the university archives that somebody submits a FOIA request for, would go through that same process as it always has. The other thing that we're trying to do, or considering for mitigating the risk of not being able to find every last shred of personally identifiable information, is to not make this content available publicly, at least not initially, until there's more confidence in the tools and their abilities. I think we've talked about having like a terminal. Somebody would come in and look at the content locally. That I think maybe they sign some sort of a confidentiality agreement if they are exposed to anything that's personal in nature. So I think we're kind of trying to provide a way so it's not just a dump out to the web of all this content that we're only 95% confident that we found everything that we're looking for sensitive-wise, because that 5% could be very damaging to whoever's information that is. So I think having that risk mitigation, I think the tool should be able to do a pretty good job at highlighting areas that are particularly sensitive. I feel like anything to do with litigation, anything to do with medical, I think a lot of the content will be flagged. It's just going to be some of that, maybe reading between the lines stuff where you can kind of infer that somebody was talking about a particular topic. Potentially even just some string of digits that if you knew that string of digits is relevant to, that's the format of somebody's student ID or prisoner number or something like that, that people can make relationships that maybe the software wouldn't be able to do. So I think that's our attempt to hopefully mitigate against that. A lot of this content isn't even coming to the archives until it's relatively old. So the governor's email, a lot of that is, I think, goes back to about 2003. So that older content, I think the time kind of diminishes the sensitivity of some of that stuff. The ongoing negotiations around legislation, a lot of those legislators may not even be in office anymore. The bill either was passed or failed, so there's probably not as much personal sensitivity around some of that stuff.
And I think the tools give us the opportunity as well to, we're hopeful, of course this is all still ongoing here, to be able to, again, be helping with the active management of the content, and not just, so I mean, it's somewhat in answering to the question here about it, seeing it as a processing tool or an access tool. I really think, we're anticipating it both ways, and that and I think we're going to see it. You're already seeing it in things like with Microsoft buying Equivio and incorporating that into Outlook, so that there's opportunities for the average person to kind of process their own content before they would do something else with it. And in terms of the question about coming up with a list of rules, are you talking about the list of rules for redaction, or for, you know,
Right. For example, certain words or social security numbers or things like that.
Yeah, I think what we will start with is probably the types of the types of rules that are already in place around FOIA, because that's something that we're obligated to pay attention to anyway. And beyond that, I think depending on the office or the people involved, we would seek their guidance around if there's certain phrases or concepts, because there might have been a particularly sensitive topic, so that in each case we'll be looking at the rules based on the people involved with the email, if we have more than one set of it.
So there was another question about, do you know of other tools, other predictive coding tools? One viewer is looking at HP Control Point, and they're interested in others.
Brent's been exploring, he's been the one who's been doing the most poking around to try to find other tools, and I think there's, and you're a little bit more familiar with some of those, so do you remember the names of some of them you've been looking at?
Nuix is one that I recall. There's an open source tool called Sophia ML that I think some of the open source tools have been developed around. There's a TAR toolkit that one of the National Institute for Standards and Technology, there's a text retrieval conference that they run, and the total recall track of that is run by a couple of folks that we've been in contact with, and Gordon Cormack is one of the people affiliated with that. He's written this TAR toolkit that he has posted out on one of his University of Waterloo website pages. So that's a Linux-based tool that apparently can do some of this stuff.
You didn't look at the control point by HP?
I don't think I've looked at that one. There was I think there was an IBM product I looked at. I don't know that I've looked at an HP product yet.
So I guess I would be curious also of the participants here. So if you've looked at HP Control Point, has that, and how far have you gotten into looking at that? Are you feeling good about that? Because maybe we should put that on our short list.
We will let you know if they respond. Oh, go ahead,
sorry,
Brad.
Go ahead. Just a thing interesting to note. When I was looking for the link to oh shoot, I can't even find the Equivio. I noticed that they have been acquired by Microsoft, and so I'm going to be interested as someone who is trying to put SharePoint and Office 365 into place at his institution. I'm going to be interested to see how they integrate that functionality into their e-discovery and information governance suite.
Yeah, well, that's actually what we're really excited about, that because Equivio is now part of of Microsoft 365, that we think that it's actually going to be, at some point, for anyone who's got the licenses for Microsoft and Outlook Exchange server, that could be a really boon for people to be doing their own review of their emails, as well as the archivists being able to use it. We're really hopeful that as we go forward with this, we're hoping to get a little bit of some grant funding, and if we get that, we think we can have a more sustained approach to what we've been exploring here, and be able to really understand the potential for Equivio. I think, again, you have worked with it on your Gmail account at this point, right?
Yeah, so the Office 365, it's the E5 Enterprise license. They have a free demo, a 30-day demo that you can do. So I'm actually, that expires for me here next Tuesday, but I've loaded up some of my own personal Gmail account content, just synced that account into 365, and then I've reviewed about, I think, 600 messages, and it's actually kind of fun to go through your old email and see some of the it's like conversations I don't even remember having when I was in undergrad days. But yeah, it's kind of I created a few good different categories of things that I'm kind of flagging, whether it's related to higher education, whether it's related to work, whether it's related to just ordering things or bills or whatever, things like that. And it seems to be doing, actually, it likes the bills category a lot because it's able to find anything that has invoice or contract or payment due kind of keywords. It's pretty consistent. Things that are a little bit fuzzier, of course, are going to be things about family and get-togethers and things like that. But it's kind of been a little fun experiment. And like I said, it's a free 30-day trial. There's a bit of a learning curve to setting it up, so hopefully I'll get a chance to document some of what I've found, and if we are able to actually acquire some licenses for longer-term use, that'll definitely happen. But
Okay.
good results so far.
So do you have any advice for archivists or records managers that are looking to implement their own program? Do you have any good first steps to take?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the first step is taking a look at what you have. So I mean, are you in a place where you've actually got some stashes of people's email, like especially from the archive side? If you have faculty papers and faculty who have donated their email, I mean, that's a good starting point to be able to have that content. And I don't know what other universities do around the transfer of that content to the archives. Here, we actually have them go through the typical deed of gift process. But I think having content is an absolute starting point. You need that, and then I think the other piece of this is again, it's kind of a moving target here, because this is we're trying to find ways to take software capabilities that have been out there for a while in the e-discovery world and apply them in this environment that's not necessarily going to have the funding sources to be able to support those sorts of licenses. So the development of these tools, though, and the way, I think that's the move for Equivio to be bought by Microsoft, I think, is huge, because Microsoft has such a footprint everywhere. So I think a starting point would be to see if your institution is moving towards 365 and you have the opportunity to explore Equivio. That would be a good step just to learn about that. We're very hopeful that these other tools we're looking at, some of them are going to, they're at least the one company that we've been talking to through the ties with the university, they're very interested in a new market besides the e-discovery market, and they understand that the money isn't going to be there for archivists or records managers the way it's there with these companies in e-discovery. But I think again, it's an opportunity for them to have a product that will have quite a bit of that functionality that they can go into higher ed and other markets with. So I would say that the other next step would be just to keep your eyes and ears open as these things are starting to develop, because I don't think most of us are going to have the resources to just whole cloth go purchase e-discovery software. But I think there's also many of participants here may be aware of the ePad software that's being developed at Stanford. So that's really one to take a look at. It doesn't have quite the same kind of functionality that we're hoping to get with these other tools in terms of looking at the the relationships between the communicators over time, necessarily, things like that. But there's a lot of good work that's going into that tool, and it's really worth taking a look at that. And that is open source, and it's it's still. I know they're looking to add some more functionality to that, so that's be another thing I would say. Good. All right. So I think that would be, in terms of starting points. I would say that would be the way to go. I think the other thing is, I'm just kind of curious if people have suggestions for getting the email. Again, from a higher ed point of view, it's really tricky to mandate that people hand over their email for consideration to the archives, and I think that's an ongoing challenge for us.
A good first step was, for us, I think, was to just make sure that people were being thoughtful when, especially as people separate from the university. By default, a lot of our email accounts, will go away at some period of time after somebody's separated, and to just be thoughtful that if you're a senior administrator, one, we identify the list of who those people are that the archives is most interested in. So we have the Capstone list, essentially. Providing that, having those conversations with those offices to make them aware of that fact, and then at a minimum, making sure that the successor has a copy of the predecessor's office. I mean, just for business continuity purposes, that seems like a good practice to have. So even if it doesn't get transferred to the archives immediately, at least it's not lost. I think that was a good first step that we took.
Yeah, and
then having those conversations to try to get that email eventually transferred. I think people are more supportive to give their predecessor's email if they still have it from 5 or 10 years ago. Again, the issues have generally died down, and they know that it's not their own email, so they're less resistant for that purpose as well.
That's probably why our governor didn't mind handing over our other governor's email. So. But I think that's the, just being aware that some of these tools, I think, are going to be approachable or available or affordable down the road here, and thinking about how they could be applied to help both with the content coming to the archives as well as helping people be comfortable giving it to the archives. If you can go through your own email with Equivio and unequivocally say, this stuff here, I'm not worried about, it has nothing personal in it, and I even find it boring, but if the archives wants it, here you go. I think that can be a big help. So.
All right, I'm going to ask one last question we got on the blog. Have you talked with the Brown Dog folks at NCSA about their tools?
I've not talked to the Brown Dog folks. Good suggestion, though. So, as the person asking that, have you been in touch with the Brown Dog folks?
Oh, that one came in on the blog.
Oh, it's on the blog. Sorry,
I didn't ask that one. That one came from Mark Conrad. I believe Mark Conrad from NARA.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. We will do a follow-up post on the schedule blog with some additional links and information. Thank you very much, Joanne and Brent, for presenting and sharing with us today. I think this was very helpful for everyone who watched. And I hope that we'll be having a Hangout soon, actually on ePad. So that will be a good follow-up to this. So once again, thank you. And I hope you have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Bye.